right, today we're going to talk about the Roaring Twenties, the booming economy for some. So we're going to look at the economic growth, the idea of consumerism, and the development of American culture in the 1920s. All right, so what leads to economic growth? Post-World War I, immediately you have a little bit of a recession. There's not as much demand coming out of Europe for American-made goods, things made out of steel, or food items. So for a little bit, the economy takes a little bit of a dive, a little bit of an economic downturn, and that is known as a recession. However, that recession is short-lived. Throughout most of the 20s, the economic times pick up, and largely due to an increase of electrification of both the homes and the industries within the United States. As we see more and more electricity provided to homes and to industries, we're seeing more productivity. People can work longer hours. Automated machinery, everything run on electricity just makes mass production move a lot more efficiently. We can make more things faster, make more things cheaper. There's also like new management techniques, new development techniques. We're just running businesses a lot more efficient and a lot better. So the scale of our economy is increasing, and largely due to electricity. There's also an increase in, or an attempt, a start to develop better working relations between the labor and the management side of it. So they're starting to look at, the work hour days and the pay, and they're starting to say, hey, we need to help out our workers. Let's kind of build on those relations so we have happier workers. Happy worker equals more productive workers. This idea of consumerism. Our society is shifting culturally to this idea of needing to buy more things and to buy the newest and latest things. And with electricity comes all sorts of new types of appliances, the new age machinery that people just must have. So things that traditionally weren't electrified are now electrified, like refrigerators, radios, stoves, vacuums. Everything that can make life easier for people is now being electrified, and people want them. And if you can't afford it right off the bat, if you initially don't have all the money or cash to put up front for these new age items, you can use something called installment buying. So you put down a deposit, maybe $5 or $10, and then each month you start making small payments until you've paid off that good, like the new stove you wanted to buy or the radio or whatever. So installment buying becomes this new craze, this new buying method that helps develop this idea of a consumerist society where people are looking to buy more of the newest and latest things. So culturally, we're shifting to this new era of buying more of the newest and latest things. And again, all these things make life easier. Everything is electrified, from refrigerators to phones to washers and dryers, the whole 9 yards. Everything electrified. Also, the 1920s represent the age of the automobile. Henry Ford is going to revolutionize the way that automobiles are produced. Mass production techniques, the assembly line process. So instead of building one car from scratch, from start to finish, Henry Ford creates this assembly line where each section of the car will be put together one section at a time. So at the first section, maybe you build the frame. And at the next section, you'll have a group of workers that'll put the tires on. The next section, they'll put the seats in, and so on and so on. So it just speeds up the process. And if you can speed up the process, you're going to build more cars, which means the more you have of it, the lower the price is going to be. And the lower the price, the happier we, the consumers, are, because we like to pay lower prices. With the automobile industry comes a lot of other economic benefits too. As there's more cars being built, there's more of an increase in other side industries related to the car, like steel. You need more steel for the steel parts on the car, rubber for the tires, glass for the windshields and windows, everything else. So everything related to the automobile industry is also going to see an increase in their sales. With the car is going to lead to an increase of more roads, more highways, more roadside restaurants, more mechanics, more garages. Everything centered around the car and all the side industries, they're also going to see a benefit. It's going to lead to more jobs. Cars also help develop the suburbs, the area just outside of the city. So no longer are people confined or congested to the inner city, the urban centers. People can make the commute. Now that they have a car, they can travel from the suburbs into the city, to and from work, and the car really makes this happen. Here's some visuals on the assembly line process. Like I said here, you've got the tires coming down the belt here. The workers would take the tires, put them on the frame, as you can see here. And then at the next section, they add another piece, and then on the next section, they'll put like the top part of the car on. So that's the idea of the assembly line process. Speeds up production, lowers the price, revolutionizes the automobile industry by making cars more affordable to more people. Thanks, Henry Ford. However, not everyone is prospering in the 1920s. Farmers have it pretty tough. Technology, while a great thing, it makes us more efficient, makes us more productive, it also replaces the need for a lot of physical labor. What could be done with like horses and people can now be replaced, by one simple tractor. So a lot of farmers are going out of business due to increase in technology. Like we said, after World War I, the large demand for crops also takes a drop. So farmers and the crops they produced are not in high of demand. Therefore, it's harder for them to sell their crops. And we also see a drop in the prices of farm goods. So lower prices, less demand, and an increase of technology. This is going to drive a lot of farmers out of business. It's going to be hard for them to pay off their debts. Many of them lose their farm. It's just not an all-around good time to be a farmer in America. This political cartoon kind of sums up the farming industry in the 1920s. You got the farmer here looking over into this industrial city, and he sees the factories. That's where all the money is, and farming, not so much. Put it up for sale. Socially and culturally, lots of changes in the 1920s, especially for women. Remember, we talked about the 19th Amendment in 1919. The 19th Amendment gives women the right to vote. That doesn't get ratified until 1920. With the right to vote comes more opportunities. You get job opportunities. Women aren't confined to the roles of just simply working from home anymore. Women are starting to expand their horizons socially and culturally. And this idea, or the flappers, really became the embodiment of the spirit of the free woman of the 1920s, characterized by their bobbed or short hair, their wearing of short skirts, excessive amounts of makeup and lipstick, expanding into all sorts of social activities. This was the sort of representation of women of the 1920s. They're called flappers because of when they would go out to the clubs and dance or whatever, they would be flapping their arms and legs, and their short skirts would be flapping everywhere. Crazy kids and you flappers you. Mass media also becomes a very popular form of entertainment. We're just referring to ways in which the media is reaching large amounts of people. Newspapers have been around for a while. They're going to continue to be very popular in the 20s. We're also going to see the development of radio. TV doesn't exist yet, but radio is going to really come of age in the 1920s. Sports broadcasts, news broadcasts, the soap operas, these dramatic stories being told over the radio. These were really popular, and the radio announcers had a really good way of painting a picture with their voices and telling a story. And people would sit around at in the home at night and listen to the radio and to the news, to sports, to the soaps or whatever. That was the major, most popular form of mass media at the time. Movies started to become more popular. In 1927, you have the first talkie, the first movie with sound. So newspapers, radio, movies, this is mass media. This is really coming of age in the 1920s. Also becoming more popular, sports. The professional athlete starts to play more of a role in people's lives. People are taking interest. People have more time to go to sporting events. Jack Dempsey, famous boxer of the 1920s. Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb, two famous baseball players. Charles Lindbergh, in 1927, is the first man to fly across the Atlantic Ocean by himself. And here's a picture of him in front of his plane, the Spirit of St. Louis. People took a great interest to this. This was a great accomplishment socially, culturally for America. We were the first to do it. So these types of people became, real popular, and people wanted to talk about it, talk about their accomplishments, what they did. Other fads, crazes, one particular thing of the 20s is something called flagpole sitting, where people would climb up on these skyscrapers and do really crazy stuff like balance on a board. The flagpole, they would climb up a flagpole and sit atop of it, you know, to each their own. Who in their right mind would do anything like that? Good thing we don't do stuff like that anymore today. That would be crazy, that would be insane. No one's going to take the time to climb up a giant building or flagpole to simply have their photograph taken atop of that, all in an effort for some new age craze or fad. Thankfully, we've grown beyond that. Oh, this one's got sound. Okay, the 20s is the jazz era. So jazz is a form of music that is truly an American art form in itself. Every other music that's been around is developed from somewhere else, but jazz is truly American. And it develops in the 1920s. Starts out in New Orleans and then works its way up into the northern cities and becomes really popular and famous in New York City during something that's called the Harlem Renaissance. In the Harlem Renaissance, it's this flourishment of art and literature and culture centered around African Americans. As the Great Migration takes hold from 1910 to the 1970s, but the bulk of it in the 20s, this rebirth of African American culture and literature becomes really popular, not just amongst black people, but for white people too. This becomes the new fad, this becomes the new thing, and people start to pay attention to the issues, not just surrounded by art, but also the social struggles for black people as well. Artists are talking about their struggles with slavery and Reconstruction era politics. And a lot of this is displayed through their art. They're talking about their own culture. For the first time, black people in this country are starting to take an active role and become a prominent part of the mainstream culture. Very impactful, very empowering for black people. Harlem is located in New York City, particularly in this part of Manhattan. Here's Manhattan here. If you zoom in Manhattan here on the northern part, that is Harlem. This is the epicenter of where we see this rebirth of African American culture. So again, what's spurring the Harlem Renaissance? It all stems from that Great Migration, that massive movement of people from the South to the northern cities, places like New York, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland. Those are the big spots where we start to see African Americans move from. So here's the map again we looked at before, showing you where these settlement patterns typically took place for that Great Migration. The 1920s, it's a social, cultural period, and a lot of the things that are happening are served much better in video. So we'll take some time in class, we'll look at more of those individually. They'll show up a lot better and make more sense in videos than they will in a PowerPoint video lesson. All right.